He didn't hesitate. The water was freezing, the current merciless, but when he saw someone drowning, he jumped in without a second thought. By the time the sirens wailed and cameras appeared, he'd already saved a life. But what came after wasn't gratitude. It was suspicion. Whispers turned to headlines, and suddenly the hero is treated like a threat. Why did saving a stranger make him the enemy? What dark truth was waiting beneath the surface that day? The one no one wanted to see? Marcus Reed wasn't famous, rich, or reckless, just a hardworking man who believed in doing the right thing. Every morning, he'd clock in at the construction site before sunrise, and by sunset, he was back home, fixing his mother's porch or helping neighbors with odd jobs. People in town knew him as the guy who'd give you his last dollar. That morning had started like any other coffee from the corner store, headphones in, the city waking up around him. The river ran alongside the park, calm and silver under the early light. Marcus liked walking by it. It was the only place that still felt peaceful. But peace doesn't last long when you live in a world that sees your skin before your soul. As Marcus leaned on the railing, he noticed something, a faint splash, a muffled cry. At first, he thought it was a prank. Then he saw a figure struggling against the current, arms flailing, sinking fast. Instinct took over. He dropped his phone, kicked off his shoes, and dove in. In that instant, the world shifted. He didn't know it yet, but this single act of courage would unravel a secret so heavy, it would turn a rescue into a reckoning, and test how far society's gratitude really goes when the hero doesn't look like one. The water was colder than he'd imagined, thick, heavy, and biting with every stroke. Marcus fought against the current, lungs burning, eyes locked on the woman's fading silhouette. She wasn't far, but the current was strong, tugging at him like invisible hands. When he finally reached her, she was limp, barely conscious. He wrapped his arm around her and kicked hard toward the shore. By the time he pulled her onto the muddy bank, his arms were trembling. He checked for a pulse. She was breathing. Relief washed over him like sunlight. A small crowd gathered, phones out, faces blurred by shock and curiosity. Then came the sound that made his chest tighten, the sirens. Police cars screeched to a halt. Two officers jumped out, running toward them. Marcus raised his hands instinctively, still catching his breath. But instead of helping, one shouted, "Step away from her!" The tone wasn't concern, it was command. Confusion flickered across Marcus's face. "She's hurt," he tried to explain. But the officers were already closing in. They pulled him back roughly, pushing him to the ground. Someone yelled, "He attacked her!" A voice Marcus didn't recognize. The crowd gasped, murmurs spreading like wildfire. The woman, barely conscious, tried to speak, but her words were lost in the chaos. Marcus felt the cold press of metal cuffs around his wrists. The same hands that had pulled a stranger from death were now pinned behind his back. Cameras flashed, voices shouted. To the world watching, the story had already been written. Black man, white woman, police, crime. At the station, they questioned him for hours, where he'd been, why he was near the river, what he'd done to her. Each answer was met with silence or disbelief. When he asked about the woman, they said nothing, just exchanged glances that made his stomach drop. Days passed. The story hit the news. Local woman saved from drowning suspect in custody pending investigation. His name plastered across headlines, his mugshot beside hers. The hero had become the villain. Then, a shift. The woman, her name was Claire, recovered. She came forward, insisting he'd saved her life, not hurt her. Reporters scrambled to correct themselves, but it was too late. The damage was done. Still, something in her eyes haunted. Distant told Marcus there was more. When she finally met him after his release, her hands trembled as she spoke. She confessed she hadn't fallen accidentally. Someone had pushed her. And the person responsible wasn't just anyone. It was a man connected to the same department that had arrested Marcus. The revelation hit like thunder. The people meant to protect her had tried to silence her. And when Marcus jumped in that river, he'd saved more than one life. He'd exposed a secret that could destroy reputations. But exposing the truth came with a price. Phones began ringing at his job. Friends distanced themselves. Anonymous messages told him to stay quiet if you know what's good for you. The same town that once called him a hero now saw him as a problem. Still, Marcus couldn't walk away. He'd seen too much, lost too much, to stay silent. What began as an act of kindness had become a battle against something far darker, and this time, the current he was fighting wasn't in the water. The night of the town hearing felt like stepping into a storm with no shelter. Cameras lined the courthouse steps, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Marcus stood there tired, worn, but unbroken. Claire was beside him, pale and shaking, ready to tell the truth. Inside, officers lined the back wall, their badges gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. When Claire spoke, the room went silent. She named the man who pushed her, the same officer who'd helped orchestrate Marcus's arrest. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The chief shifted uncomfortably. Papers shuffled, but no one looked her in the eye. Then, almost on cue, someone shouted from the back, "You're lying!" In an instant, chaos erupted. Shouts echoed. Cameras flashed. Marcus felt hands shove him again. The familiar sting of control disguised as order. Reporters spun the scene, snapping photos of him being restrained once more while the real guilty man slipped quietly out the side door. But this time, Marcus didn't stay silent. "You can arrest me again," he said, voice trembling but steady. "But the truth's already out there." And it was. A local reporter had caught every word of Claire's confession live. Within hours, the footage spread online, millions watching the man they'd called a criminal stand tall in the face of injustice. The backlash came fast. Protests outside the station, demands for accountability. The officer was suspended, the chief forced to answer questions he'd avoided for years. But Marcus's victory wasn't sweet, it was scarred. He'd lost his job, his reputation, his peace. That night, he walked back to the river, the same spot where it all began. The water moved slow under the moonlight, quiet and cold. He stared at it, wondering how a single act of kindness could cause so much pain, and yet still be worth it. Because in that river, he hadn't just saved a woman's life, he'd dragged the truth to the surface. And now, the whole world was watching. Months passed, but the echoes of that day never really faded. The town moved on, new headlines, new scandals. But for Marcus, every siren still made his chest tighten. Every glance from a stranger carried the weight of what he'd lived through. He'd cleared his name, yes, but in a system built to doubt him from the start, innocence was never enough. Claire left town soon after, searching for peace somewhere. Her face wasn't tied to whispers and fear. But she never forgot the man who risked his life for her. Quietly, she began speaking out, telling their story in classrooms, online, anywhere someone would listen. Each time, she ended with the same words. "He saved me twice, once from the river, and once from silence." As for Marcus, he turned his pain into purpose. He began mentoring young men in his community, teaching them how to navigate a world that too often saw them as suspects before it saw their humanity. He told them, "You can't control how they see you, but you can control what you stand for." The footage from that courthouse still circulates today, a reminder of how truth struggles to breathe in a world that keeps trying to hold it underwater. And yet, it rises, again and again. Because this story isn't just about one man, one rescue, or one town. It's about the quiet courage it takes to confront a system that rewards silence and punishes skin. It's about how quickly a hero can become a target, and how far we still have to go before justice isn't determined by color. He never asked for fame or even forgiveness. He only wanted to be seen for who he truly was. So the question remains, how many more rivers must be crossed before we finally learn to see the humanity on the other side?